The Universal Threat Assessment Bureau maintained what was arguably the galaxy's most comprehensive database of apex predators, a digital monument to paranoia that would make any insurance actuary weep with professional envy. Every known species had contributed their nightmares to this collective catalogue of terror, creating a cosmic bestiary that read like a fever dream written by someone with severe trust issues. Take the Vorthak Empire's entry for the dreaded shadow weavers of Kepler 442b, 6-foot-tall spiders that could phase through solid matter and apparently had a taste for Vorthak brain tissue. Terrifying, certainly, until you realized the Vorthak possessed the collective intelligence of a particularly dim houseplant. The crystalline collective's submission was equally impressive. The Void Singers, ethereal beings whose haunting melodies could shatter crystal formations from 3-star systems away. What they failed to mention was that the Void Singers were essentially space whales with good acoustics. But tucked away in subsection 847 Alpha was an entry that made even jaded xenobiologists pause their morning stimulants mid-sip. The entry was marked with so many warning symbols it looked like someone had sneezed glitter onto a stop sign. Species designation Homo sapiens. Common name humans. The file read like a horror novel written by someone who'd watched too many nature documentaries while severely caffeinated. Persistence hunters capable of running prey to exhaustion across continental distances. Pack hunters with complex communication systems and tool-making abilities that bordered on supernatural. Omnivorous consumption patterns with documented willingness to eat literally anything that couldn't eat them first, and several things that could. Most terrifyingly, they possessed something called spite, defined as the ability to continue pursuing objectives, despite obvious personal detriment, apparently for entertainment purposes. The clinical assessment concluded with a note that would have been hilarious if it weren't so deeply unsettling: recommended response to human contact. Immediate evacuation of surrounding star systems. Do not attempt communication. Do not make eye contact. Do not run. They enjoy the chase. Which made it all the more baffling that Marcus Chen was currently standing in line at a coffee shop on Nexus Station, looking about as threatening as a slightly rumpled accountant. Marcus possessed all the predatory instincts his species was famous for, which he employed to hunt down the perfect breakfast pastry while stalking his phone for work emails. His morning routine was a masterclass in human efficiency: consume caffeine, process information, maintain social facade, repeat until unconsciousness seemed preferable to productivity. The apex predator of known space was running on 4 hours of sleep and desperate hope that the coffee shop hadn't run out of chocolate croissants again. At 6'2", with unremarkable brown hair that made him invisible in crowds, Marcus represented everything the galaxy found terrifying about humans while embodying nothing that actually seemed scary. He worked as a systems analyst for the station's environmental controls, a job involving zero hunting, unless you counted tracking down malfunctioning air recyclers and stalking elusive bugs in atmospheric processing code. His greatest predatory achievement this month had been successfully identifying why Sector 7's humidity controls kept defaulting to tropical rainforest every Tuesday. The hunt had taken 3 weeks of patient, methodical pursuit, exactly the kind his species was notorious for. He'd tracked it through 17 subsystems, cross-referenced maintenance logs going back 6 months, and finally cornered the problem in a routine someone had apparently written while under the influence of severe sleep deprivation. The irony wasn't lost on the 3-member surveillance team from the Zephyrian Intelligence Division who had been monitoring his activities for 4 months. They'd requested this assignment, expecting to document hunting patterns of a Class 2 apex predator. Instead, they'd compiled 47 hours of footage showing Marcus debugging code, eating sandwiches, and engaging in what their cultural anthropologists classified as aggressive politeness with co-workers. Senior observer Kelthara had initially been thrilled by the assignment. Studying human behavior was considered career-making in xenobiological circles, assuming you survived. The Zephyrians, being naturally cautious and having evolved from prey animals, approached predator studies with methodical paranoia that would have impressed conspiracy theorists. Their surveillance logs read like nature documentaries written by someone who'd never seen nature. Day 47, subject acquired caffeinated beverage using complex social ritual involving verbal exchange and processed currency. Consumption pattern suggests preparation for extended hunting period. Recommend maintaining safe observation distance of no less than 2 kilometers. The extended hunting period turned out to be Marcus spending 8 hours optimizing database queries and occasionally muttering at his computer screen in what Zephyrians classified as low-level threat displays. The most dangerous thing he'd done all week was accidentally delete a file and spend 20 minutes explaining to his colleague why this was totally fine, happens all the time, that's what backups are for. Everything changed on a Tuesday when Marcus encountered what would be classified as high-value target, potential prey selection event. Lyralei Voss was exactly the kind of being that should have triggered every evolutionary warning system humans possessed. Standing barely 5 feet tall with delicate bone structure and luminescent blue skin of a celestial harmony species, she represented everything fragile and ethereal that predatory instincts were designed to exploit. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for artistic achievements, philosophical insights, and complete inability to defend themselves against anything more threatening than a stern glance. At 6'2", with unremarkable brown hair that made him invisible in crowds, Marcus represented everything the galaxy found terrifying about humans while embodying nothing that actually seemed scary. He worked as a systems analyst for the station's environmental controls, a job involving zero hunting, unless you counted tracking down malfunctioning air recyclers and stalking elusive bugs in atmospheric processing code. His greatest predatory achievement this month had been successfully identifying why Sector 7's humidity controls kept defaulting to tropical rainforest every Tuesday. The hunt had taken 3 weeks of patient, methodical pursuit, exactly the kind his species was notorious for. He'd tracked it through 17 subsystems, cross-referenced maintenance logs going back 6 months, and finally cornered the problem in a routine someone had apparently written while under the influence of severe sleep deprivation. The irony wasn't lost on the 3-member surveillance team from the Zephyrian Intelligence Division who had been monitoring his activities for 4 months. They'd requested this assignment expecting to document hunting patterns of a Class ED-12 apex predator. Instead, they'd compiled 47 hours of footage showing Marcus debugging code, eating sandwiches, and engaging in what their cultural anthropologists classified as aggressive politeness with co-workers. Senior observer Kelthara had initially been thrilled by the assignment. Studying human behavior was considered career-making in xenobiological circles, assuming you survived. The Zephyrians, being naturally cautious and having evolved from prey animals, approached predator studies with methodical paranoia that would have impressed conspiracy theorists. Their surveillance logs read like nature documentaries written by someone who'd never seen nature. Day 47. Subject acquired caffeinated beverage using complex social ritual involving verbal exchange and processed currency. Consumption pattern suggests preparation for extended hunting period. Recommend maintaining safe observation distance of no less than 2 kilometers. The extended hunting period turned out to be Marcus spending 8 hours optimizing database queries and occasionally muttering at his computer screen in what Zephyrians classified as low-level threat displays. The most dangerous thing he'd done all week was accidentally delete a file and spend 20 minutes explaining to his colleague why this was totally fine, happens all the time, that's what backups are for. Everything changed on a Tuesday when Marcus encountered what would be classified as high-value target, potential prey selection event. The celestial harmony species had survived through technological advancement and strategic hiding behind bigger, more aggressive neighbors. They were the galactic equivalent of that friend who talks tough but immediately calls their older brother when things get serious. Individually, they possessed all the combat effectiveness of a strongly worded letter written on particularly expensive stationery. Marcus first encountered Lyralei in the station's central plaza, where she was attempting to negotiate with a food vendor whose grasp of galactic standard was limited to numbers and creative profanity. She spoke with the kind of musical accent that made simple sentences sound like poetry, which would have been more helpful if the vendor had any interest in literature instead of payment processing. The surveillance team immediately went on high alert. They'd read theoretical papers about human pack hunting strategies, about how apex predators selected targets based on perceived vulnerability. Here was a textbook example: isolated prey, communication barriers, clear distress signs. The betting pool shifted heavily toward immediate predatory response within 37 minutes. What actually happened was Marcus walking over, assessing the situation with quick pattern recognition his species was famous for, and helping translate between Lyralei's formal scholarly galactic standard and the vendor's aggressively colloquial version. The interaction took 4 minutes and concluded with everyone having successfully completed a simple commercial transaction. The surveillance team's initial reaction was professional confusion, followed by heated debate about whether they'd witnessed an unusually sophisticated hunting strategy. Senior observer Kelthara spent 3 hours reviewing footage, looking for signs of psychological manipulation techniques human predators were supposedly capable of. Instead, she found Marcus making small talk about weather and asking if Lyralei needed directions. Cultural anthropologists classified this as preliminary contact protocol, establishing trust for later exploitation. The fact that Marcus seemed genuinely pleased to meet another person and showed no obvious signs of calculating her nutritional value was interpreted as evidence of how dangerously sophisticated human deception could be. Over following weeks, what the surveillance team documented as extended stalking behavior with increasing frequency of contact events was actually Marcus developing what humans called a crush and Zephyrians classified as a potential diplomatic incident. He began timing coffee runs to coincide with Lyralei's work schedule. He started taking lunch breaks in areas where she was likely conducting research. He even learned basic phrases in her native language, which the surveillance team noted with growing alarm was exactly the behavior you'd expect from a predator studying prey communication patterns. The gifts started in week 3. First, just an extra coffee when he'd accidentally ordered too many. Then a book about human history she might find interesting for her anthropological research. By week 4, he was bringing samples of human art and music, which the surveillance team interpreted as ritualistic offering behavior, possible appeasement of prey, prior to consumption. Reports grew increasingly frantic as Marcus's behavior escalated. He was clearly building toward something, displaying all the patience and methodical planning that made human hunters so terrifying. Contact frequency was increasing. Gifts were becoming more personal. He'd even started territorial marking behavior by leaving small tokens in her workspace, a coffee cup here, a note there, once a small potted plant that he claimed needed better lighting than his apartment could provide. Lyralei, for her part, was displaying what her species would have recognized as classic signs of developing romantic feelings while trying to be professional. Unfortunately, celestial harmony courtship behaviors involved cautious approach and retreat patterns that looked remarkably similar to prey animal defensive strategies when viewed through predator-focused surveillance equipment. The surveillance team documented her evasive maneuvers and submissive posturing with clinical detail, usually reserved for nature documentaries about gazelles. They noted how she would freeze when Marcus approached unexpectedly. She was startled. How she would expose vulnerable areas during conversation. She was laughing. And how she consistently failed to establish secure escape routes during interactions. She enjoyed talking to him and wasn't concerned about needing to run. The crisis point came on a Friday, when Marcus finally decided to make what the surveillance team would classify as the terminal approach. Final hunting phase initiated. He had spent the previous evening crafting what he considered a carefully worded dinner invitation, which had taken 2 hours and 3 complete rewrites. The surveillance team recorded the entire process, noting his extensive preparation rituals and repetitive behavioral patterns indicating heightened predatory focus. Marcus found Lyralei in the research lab where she'd been analyzing samples of human cultural artifacts for her dissertation on interspecies communication through artistic expression. She was bent over a microscope, studying the crystalline structure of what was actually a mass-produced snow globe he'd picked up at the gift shop, but which she was treating with reverent attention usually reserved for archaeological treasures. The surveillance team positioned themselves for optimal coverage of what they expected to be either a bloodbath or a masterclass in predatory psychology. Senior observer Kelthara had her finger hovering over the emergency beacon. Junior observers were running final betting pools on whether Marcus would go for a quick kill or prefer to play with his prey first. What they witnessed was one of the most awkward romantic confessions in recorded galactic history. Marcus cleared his throat, which Lyralei interpreted as a polite attempt to get her attention, and the surveillance team logged as a pre-attack vocalization. She looked up with the kind of smile that made Marcus temporarily forget how to form coherent sentences, while simultaneously making 3 trained intelligence operatives check their equipment for subliminal warfare techniques. "Hey," Marcus said, because his extensive preparation had apparently abandoned him in favor of single-syllable communication. "Hey yourself," Lyralei replied, which the surveillance team noted was either incredibly brave or evidence that humans possessed hypnotic influence over prey. Marcus took what he intended as a casual step forward, recorded as aggressive advancement into prey's personal space. Lyralei tilted her head in curious interest, but which looked remarkably like a submission posture to observers who had spent months studying predator-prey dynamics. "I was wondering," Marcus continued, his voice carrying just enough nervousness to make Lyralei find him endearing, and the surveillance team wonder if this was advanced psychological manipulation, "if you'd like to have dinner sometime. With me, together. Like, at the same table." The surveillance team held their collective breath. This was it. The moment when the galaxy's most dangerous predator would finally reveal his true nature. Senior observer Kelthara's hand tightened on her emergency beacon. Lyralei blinked once, twice, and then broke into the kind of smile that could have powered a small space station. "I'd love to," she said, and the surveillance team's equipment registered what they would later classify as complete system failure of all defensive protocols. The surveillance team spent the next 4 hours in emergency session, trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Their preliminary reports to headquarters read like fevered conspiracy theories. Subject has successfully lured prey into confined space under guise of social interaction. Prey appears willing, possibly indicating advanced mind control techniques, requesting immediate backup and hazmat protocols. The reality was considerably more mundane. Marcus spent that evening Googling good first-date restaurants on space stations and having what he considered a perfectly normal anxiety attack about shirt selection. Lyralei spent the same evening explaining to her research partner that yes, she was going on a date with a human, and no, she wasn't particularly concerned about being eaten. The date itself was a disaster by surveillance standards, and a complete success by any reasonable measure. Marcus had chosen a small restaurant specializing in authentic Earth cuisine, run by an Altarian chef whose understanding of human food was based entirely on theoretical research and what appeared to be a vendetta against seasoning. The surveillance team documented every moment, from Marcus's ritualistic grooming behaviors, he'd gotten a haircut, to what they classified as extended psychological evaluation through sustained eye contact and verbal information extraction. They talked for 3 hours about xenoarchaeology and whether pineapple belonged on pizza. By the time they filed their report, they had convinced themselves they'd documented the most sophisticated long-term hunting strategy in recorded history. Marcus had successfully captured his prey through psychological manipulation and was apparently planning to maintain this deception indefinitely for reasons that remained unclear but were undoubtedly sinister. 6 months later, the surveillance team was still filing reports that read like nature documentaries written by someone having a slow nervous breakdown. Marcus had maintained his cover by continuing to work, pay taxes, and send his mother birthday cards. The prey capture had apparently been so successful that Lyralei had moved in with him, which they interpreted as the ultimate predatory dominance. The prey was now voluntarily maintaining itself in the predator's territory. The Universal Threat Assessment Bureau's final report would run to over 3,000 pages and conclude with a recommendation that would reshape galactic policy toward humans for the next century. The official summary was brief and clinical. Human specimens appear capable of permanent behavioral modification through emotional attachment. Romantic pair bonding may represent the most effective containment strategy for Class 12 apex predators. The unofficial summary, scribbled in senior observer Kelthara's personal notes, was more honest. Turns out the galaxy's most dangerous predator can be completely neutralized by finding someone who laughs at their jokes and doesn't mind that they leave coffee cups everywhere. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that the species everyone feared as ultimate hunters had apparently evolved the capacity to be hunted themselves, not by something bigger or stronger, but by the simple, impossible, utterly human notion that some things were worth being vulnerable for. The predators had been tamed not by superior force, but by the radical possibility that they might be capable of caring about something more than winning. In the end, the Universal Threat Assessment Bureau quietly reclassified humans from apex predator, extreme caution required to apex predator, containment achievable through emotional investment. It wasn't the victory anyone had been expecting, but it was the kind of solution that could only have come from a universe with a sense of humor and a species stubborn enough to turn their greatest strength into their most endearing weakness.